I don't like it. I don't understand.
Okay.
Alright, is everyone good?
Yes.
Alright, so if you start the app and you bring up localhost port 8080, you'll see just a little JavaScript code editor here with some demos pre-built. So if you haven't already, just choose sanity check from the drop-down menu and click load. And if you run this using Command Enter or hitting run, you should see an alert that says it works. And if it doesn't, something is wrong.
Pretty cool. Is this ES?
This is ES6, so I hope you guys learned something. Alert.
Yes, it has an alert. Thank God. You do all the programming I want to.
You didn't get rid of alert. That's good.
Never alert. No, alert's still there.
Wait. No, it's all good.
Oh, good.
The transpiled ES5 looks almost identical.
It's amazing.
Template strings.
Yeah, so let's start with template strings. So you can load that up in the editor here. And this is one of, there's a bunch of stuff in ES6. We won't talk about everything because there's way too much. We'll also limit what we're talking about to things that can be transpiled into current version of JavaScript. There are a lot of really nice things that just can't be transpiled, like proxies and reflection, and we won't go over that kind of stuff, even though it's awesome and extremely useful. I'll send out around a link after this, so you can look into some of the more advanced ES6 stuff if you're interested. So,
Question before we get started.
Sure.
Is the whole hour organized over different language features, or is there also time to talk about like how to use this today, browser support, compilation flows, stuff like that?
Yeah,
or are we just thinking about
primarily individual samples and stuff, but we can set us some time at the end to talk specifically about that.
Cool.
Yep. So template strings are one of my favorite and one of the worst named features of ES6 because template strings doesn't mean what they do. So template strings in every other language is called string interpolation, which is actually what it does. So this was pretty basic, so we'll go over this really quickly. But essentially, if instead of using single quotes or double quotes, you use backticks to define a string, then you can use a $sign and braces to interpolate a JavaScript expression.
Very nice. Cool. Almost Ruby-ish.
Almost Ruby-ish. So just as an example, we'll take, or what does someone think I should do to this string here to make this ES6-ish?
You can make
Get rid of the pluses.
Yeah.
Pluses.
Change one of those words to Avery's awesome.
That is an ES6 feature.
Avery's been upgraded from mediocre to awesome.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. Don't forget to get rid of the double quotes in favor of the single quotes.
Oh, so you need to put the backticks on here over the string that's going to encapsulate
on the string. Yeah, it's a new form of quoting essentially.
And the thing that's between the braces can either be, it can be any valid JavaScript expression.
It can be any expression that evaluates to a value, or a value, values or expressions.
So if you put an alert in between those braces, will it have the side effect of having an alert box?
Let's try this.
It'll be undefined, right?
Whoa.
Confirm returns, it's an expression, right?
Right.
If you do it right.
Right.
So let's console log my hobbies are, what is your name? Because your name is a hobby.
My hobbies.
I didn't mean confirm, I meant prompt.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Cool. Cool.
How about that?
Wow.
Wow. Template strings also have a feature called tag template strings, which we won't go over here, but they're kind of neat in that they allow you to put a special tag at the beginning, and then this calls a function named tag with some data from the interpolation, and you can do cool DSL stuff with that. So that's something to look into in the documentation I'll send around later if you're interested. Cool. Any questions? It's a pretty basic one.
Does this also include that kind of like %s stuff, like
Python?
That's a feature of console log.
Okay.
Which is just like a separate function call. That still works. Yeah, it's kind of
it's
separate.
strings.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have a question about this mechanism that we're using to write this code.
Sure.
Does this get saved in local storage if I refresh?
Yes.
Okay. That's nice.
It actually gets saved onto your server.
Even better.
It
And
sends
it
me, yes.
sends you all the passwords.
Great. So I can just do
It
that
also
by having
charges
a bunch of data.
Yeah, it charges your bank account 5 cents per character for storage on the server.
Sounds like you can
Pretty
mix.
reasonable. Yeah.
You can mix and match.
Does it
the
use
backticks
canoe
with normal
payments?
things. Cool.
All right, let's move on to block scoping, which should be the next one down in your
Wait.
list of things. Oh,
At what point in
That was a
time
dumb.
these strings get interpolated
Oh, that's a good question.
at?
So people get
Huh.
transpiled.
so click Show Transpiled ES5, and you can see the code that this code gets turned into.
Okay.
And you can see it turns it into just literal ES5 string
Gotcha.
concatenation.
Gotcha. Cool.
So that's the thing about most of these features. The features we care about are ones that we can turn into ES5, so people running really crappy versions of Internet Explorer, or even recent versions of Internet Explorer, or even recent versions of Firefox and Chrome can still use all these features.
Does our current version of Chrome support ES6 natively?
No, some of them, some features. It supports like Promises, I think, out of the box, and a couple other ones that support some ones. Jan, I've got the website from Jan. It's a great grid of features that's
I support promises in general.
all right, let's move on to block scoping.
Make sure you can follow through.
I promise.
All right, so block scoping. So we have an array of 5 times spread 100 milliseconds apart, and we loop over them, and for each one we set a timeout that logs out the number. Anyone who hasn't run this yet, what do you think will happen when we run this?
It'll be the same I each time.
Same amount each time.
If only there was a
Yeah.
warning telling us not to make functions within a loop.
Yeah, well, yeah. Mr. Nick, why is it that they all said timer number 4 and they all said 500 milliseconds?
I have no idea.
Anyone else? Anyone else that we would actually hire? This is an interview question that Nick gives.
Oh, it is?
This is one of Nick's interview questions. Okay.
Yeah.
I think 2 people in this room have experienced this question.
Yeah,
Sure.
It's because there's a closure, so the function that's inside set timeout is actually referencing the same variable I, and by the time that we get to the console log, the loop is finished, so I is pointing to the last thing in the loop.
That's right. So, someone else, how would we fix this traditionally?
Fire Nick.
Use an iffy.
Use an iffy.
I
Or
love ifs.
pass the I into the function.
Or pass that into the function. Yes, those are both both good answers.
What's an iffy?
So this. Oh, let's talk about an iffy real quick.
Pass on.
So
No, we get
iffy.
both
What should I do here,
You wrap
Jason?
the function in a function.
Oh god, JavaScript. I don't know.
Oh, immediately
That's
invoked
how-
function expression.
That's the one. That's
So you make a.
Oh, iffy.
It's how you simulate block scoping when
Right.
you don't actually have it. Yeah.
So the
What's
problem that we have here is exactly what Nick just said, and that is that I is not lexically scoped. We're closing around that I inside the inner function, and the only way to create a new scope in JavaScript is to make a function call. So you wrap this all in a function call, and you pass in the I, and now you get the 5 different I's with the 5 different timers. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way you could get lexically scoped variables in JavaScript? Well, I'm here to tell you that your wishes have come true.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, I should work harder.
Yeah.
More things.
All right. So we're back to the original example, and all we have to do is change our var to a new keyword, let, L-E-T.
Whoa.
And if we run that, we see we get
Oh.
the 5 different
Oh,
values.
This is
oh, mine
crazy.
right now,
No,
because-
no,
because-
this is wrong.
What cases is this?
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah,
make
like-
much sense. I don't
yeah,
get
like
it.
This
what-
makes it too easy now.
It's actually
We're
just
all
doesn't
gonna
make
get
sense. I don't
fired.
like it. I don't understand. What's the reason?
Can I
I'm Brian,
use
I don't
let
like
in other
change.
context? Like, what happens if, like normally I'd say like var timers
Yes.
at the top. What happens if I say let timers? Like,
Yeah.
what does that
Gotcha.
mean?
So let is exactly, this will answer both your questions.
Uh-huh.
Let is exactly like var, except that it is lexically scoped, which means that every iteration through this loop, there's a different I
What
that's
does
being
let?
bound.
Var stands for variable. What does let stand for?
Let stands for let.
Some list.
Like,
Yeah, it's
like in
functional
math when they say
programming.
like
Let
let x equal 5, let
Yeah, but
y.
I got that. I mean, yes, let x equal 5.
Well,
Stands for-
I know it's used in other contexts.
It
Like, how
stands
does
for-
that work for this?
Lovingly evaluate this.
Sometimes people say like
Space.
your mom lets
Well, I
you
just
go
wasn't
out
sure
to
if
the
it stood for
side,
like,
like
lexically something.
No, that's actually a
something.
reasonable question.
That's a reasonable question, yeah.
So it looks like it uses the function approach. Not
So
immediately
if you show the transpiled ES5, you can
Yeah.
see that it actually compiles into creating a function call, because that's the only way you can simulate this in ES5. So it creates a function and calls it just like we were doing a minute ago. My general rule is use let instead of var everywhere, always. The one place you would want to do that is if you have old ES5 code where you're depending on the rules of variable hoisting or not having lexically scoped variables. Then if you change it to a let, you'll break stuff. But with any new code that I write, I pretty much will always use a let for any variable that I need to assign to.
So lexically scoped. What do those terms mean in terms of rules that we can live by here? Does it mean that for every new bracket parentheses
Exactly,
basically that is scoped only over the set of
It's scoped by the code that you see and the braces that you see rather than the execution that happens.
So it's similar to what you would expect if you were coming from Java
Right.
or C++
Or
and thought
any
that
other
Java,
language.
right? And thought that because you have braces in JavaScript, they
Right.
create a block.
Yep. That's a good point.
Python works this way as well, right? Lexical scoping.
For the most part, the one place where that doesn't work is if you have list comprehensions in Python 2, they leak.
That's right.
That's a really good point with the braces. So here we have a variable we've declared with let, set it to 1, and then inside some braces we've set it to 2, and then we've console log inside and back outside the braces
Yeah,
again.
this is what I want to see.
And so you see we've got 2 and we've got 1 outside the braces.
Okay.
And if it were vars, they
Whoa.
both print too.
Yep.
They're
And if
both
it was
print
var, they would both print 2.
You can just use those curly brackets wherever.
Yep.
And if you don't predefine the second one,
What's that?
if you set let I and then you just do
A var.
I
I
is
Var.
equal
Yeah, what if
to
we mix it?
Yeah, mix
Match.
not. Can you do both combinations?
Oh, I see
here?
what you're
Let
saying.
and bar and bar. and
I
let.
think this will probably, yeah.
And
if you remove the var?
Is it shadow?
Ah, good question. The shadow. Excuse me.
2.
Wait, it says 2.
It does say 2.
So inside the block, it's referring to the same
It's
I
referring to the
and
same
changing the value.
So you're not creating a new scoped variable or new lexically scoped variable unless you use the keyword let.
So you can use let with the in keyword and without the in keyword.
Yes. Yeah, let just declares a new
Yeah, okay.
variable. It works with the in keyword. The in keyword is a function, is a feature of loops.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Sorry. So
Right,
coming
so
from
you
a
just
functional
said
programming,
like
I see.
var I and timers.
Right.
Yeah, I see. I see. So,
Cool,
so
that's
you don't
exciting.
That
Yeah.
block that you had,
Okay.
that was just braces.
So,
Yep.
so,
That doesn't mean
so
anything.
what are they?
That's right.
What are the
It's
performance
Except creating a new
implications?
lexically
New
scoped. Yeah.
scope.
Oh, so that actually, in this case, has a meaner.
Yeah, so you
I
can
think
see
so.
we set
More
2
memory.
inside the block, and we can see it says 2,
So you
but
can
then we
switch
exit
blocks
the
wherever
block.
you want.
So that'd be an important question.
It's
for
essentially
Brian.
the same as function, right?
Basically,
Yeah,
it's
like
like it's an
immediately-
implicit immediately of
Okay,
Right.
got it, yeah.
So you know, do you have any answers to
Can you
the
press
performance
enter?
implications?
Oh, click the
Um,
transpiled ES5.
I'm not sure there would.
as a bug.
So you see, like in
I
the
guess- yeah, I
transpiled,
guess- I
in
guess
this
it
case,
would
it creates a new
transpile.
variable. I think most cases it handles it pretty well. Like if you didn't have this, it would look basically exactly the same. It does look exactly the same. So
Yeah, it's like I guess if I just look at the
Yeah.
transpiled, you can see. I mean, there's not a function call in there.
right, right,
Yeah,
you kind
actually.
of infer it.
It's just a formatting thing eventually. I mean, it's really what it is.
Yeah.
For the these
Isn't that all the difference?
Well, I mean, if you're just using let
Well, yeah.
everywhere, then
But it's a
you
better
see a
format.
lot more of these function calls.
Well, you
basically.
would only see more function calls in cases where the difference between let and var would be apparent, which is a case where you would end up using an immediately invoked function expression anyway.
Possibly, or you. I mean, like
You might just rewrite the code.
I mean, most for loops that I'm doing, I'm not running into this to any lexical sorting problems. So like but it would happen for all of them. I mean, it mostly doesn't matter, like but like there are places where I worry a lot about performance.
Sure, and in those places you could always drop down to something on the lower level and just drop into bar.
That's just wanting to figure out what
Right.
what it would be.
It also might make the debugging a little more painful if you're in a stack trace.
Oh, that's an interesting question, actually.
And you're in some function that got defined, and I don't know how once ES6 is natively supported, how Chrome will handle that.
Let's take a look. I'm going to change this over to the let example, and in each one of these you can see it says the console log was on line 5, And if you click on it, you can see that Chrome will actually show us the ES6 output because I'm using source maps.
Cool.
So source maps are also supported.
Say those words again.
You're talking about debugging, so
Yeah,
all
yeah.
your stack traces and all your debugging in Chrome, assuming you're using source maps, will show the original source code because there's a mapping between the code that's running and the code that was actually generated.
And if you don't have source maps enabled,
If you don't have source maps, you'll see the transpiled code in there instead, so that will make debugging harder. But for example, in the schools repo where we're doing this, we use source maps, so in development, all the debugging you do, you see the ES6 code. The only time that breaks down is if you try to type ES6 into your browser console because that's not natively supported.
And there's also, you're right, there's that, but there's also what about production code?
You can have source maps in production.
Alright.
So it's sort of like
It's
the
just-
copies.
I mean, basically, like, if we wanted to do this as a seminar, we would need to figure out source maps.
Right, if we needed this seminar, there'd be a little bit to figure out, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about that if we have time.
and
Alright, I'm going to move on for the sake of time. There's one other thing I want to talk about in terms of block scoping, and that's this constants. This is a super simple demo, and you'll notice that as soon as you load it, you get a compile time error down at the bottom that says answer is read only. That is because ES6 has constant values, which means that once you define them, you can't redefine them.
It's like watching your child graduate or something. It's
You're all grown up now.
So I will modify my previous statement, which said I use let everywhere, and I will instead say what actually happened is that is I use const everywhere, except for cases where I know I need to reassign the variable, in which case I switch to let, and that's what I recommend doing.
is this just a Tilly thing, or is this a broader community thing?
It's I mean, more people are using ES6. I mean, for the same reason, it's a good idea in other languages. Is that you define a variable to a value and you can't accidentally override it. This actually caught a bug in some React code I was writing the other day where I went to add a feature, I reused the variable name and didn't realize it in between where I declared it and where I used it, and because it was a const, I was actually warned before I even got to run the code. So.
How come it doesn't show the transpile ones?
Because you can't transpile.
Compile time or
Compile time error down at the bottom.
But if you got rid of the scoping of const?
Same as let. It's block scoped. Cool.
Oh, this is tricky.
So let's get into some fun stuff. Let's move down to destructuring, which is the next one.
Love this track.
Should be fine.
So we didn't talk, yeah.
Pete's in a boat.
That's that.
What's that?
Pete is in a boat.
Pete, yes. All right,
I
Pete,
guess.
Pete.
I guess it is.
All right, so destructuring. So we have a function here called repeat string, and it takes an object called options. That option has a string to repeat and a number of times that you want to repeat it. And so you can see down at the bottom that we're calling that, we're repeating the string repeat, we're repeating it 4 times, and if you run it, it works as expected.
That's good.
So, destructuring is the ability to pull values out of a data structure without explicitly referring to those keys in the data structure. So, as an example, after line 3, let's create a new line that says const, and then in a brace, type string, comma, amount equals options, like that.
Oh, this is like pattern matching.
So it basically is
function
pattern matching, yeah.
Oh.
So what this does is it's reaching into options, pulling out the values associated with the key string and the string and the key amount, and assigning them to variables of those same
It's
names.
kind of magical.
Yeah.
That's
And if you run it, you still get the same output.
So we might be more familiar with array destructuring.
Might be,
I've seen
yeah.
that in like A comma B equals array.
Yeah, that's a good point. Here, let me.
Or tuple or anything.
Yeah, that's a good one. Let's say. So now you can say.
Does it have to be a const?
It doesn't have to. It could also be a let. Then if you console log A and
So
B.
the destructuring is independent from whether it's a var or let. Can it be a var as well?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Start it.
cool.
So you can see the A and B has been
that's
pulled
so
out of the
cool.
array. Now, one of the cool things about destructuring, I'm just going to comment this out
What,
here.
what if they don't match? I mean, you can't catch it at compile time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So you just run into a runtime error, I guess.
You'll get undefined, I think, out if you try to
That makes
access
sense.
outside of the array.
So can you have extra keys that, like in that object, if
Oh, that's a good question.
And you can just look at the transpiled and
Whoa.
see what it'll do.
Look at that.
Try it.
Sure.
It's
Okay,
like
sure,
an
sure.
array.
Never mind.
So one of the cool things about destructuring is you can do it in places other than assignments. So let's get rid of this line 7 that we just typed, which says string amount equals options, and let's instead do it directly in parameters.
What are you doing? You're going crazy on us.
Wait, what?
What? Whoa.
This is
It destructures based on the argument?
The structures, so it knows that there's an object that's going to be passed into here,
Nice.
and it looks in that object for the key string and the key's amount, and pulls out those values and assigns them to those variables.
So in this case, you did not make it a constant. Did you do it with the keyword
What does
makes
that count
sense there?
as? Is that a variable?
This is it's just like if you had a variable named string and you passed it a string,
Right.
you don't declare that with a var or a const either.
But I mean, but would it make sense? Can you do that here? Because like you
can
might
reset
want it, like so that the function doesn't change it, right?
Well, you can't modify variables like that in JavaScript anyway. If you got a string as an argument, you said string.
You can
equals
modify
other
the
string.
object that it
You
points
modify the
Right.
object, but const doesn't stop you from doing that. It only
Oh, that's
stops
actually
you
an
from-
important caveat.
Yeah,
I
that is
mean, it makes
accurate.
sense, but it's something we should keep in mind.
Const
Like
only stops you from changing the reference.
if
that
you
main
pass in
points to.
something that can be mutated,
Yep.
using const will prevent you from mutated.
Yeah.
You
Can
still
you
have
do-
a constant reference to the thing that's mutable.
Right.
Can you do nested data structures with destruction?
You can do nested data structures, and you can
Oh,
look up
please
that.
don't.
Yeah, you can look that up
Nested.
in the documentation I'll send out. So one of the cool things about this, once you get used to it, you
Replacing
realize that
backbone relational.
before you had this thing called options. If you looked at the function signature, you saw this thing called options, and you're not really sure what options are to be passed in. Where with a function signature like this, you take an object. It's a lot like keyword arguments in Python.
Yeah.
So this is a lot more
That's cool.
explicit about what you're accepting.
You're going home.
So that's
baby.
kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, one more thing here
Plugs.
is the opposite of destructuring, and I don't know what it's called, so I call it structuring.
Structuring.
Firing people.
Undestructuring.
And that is in exactly the same way. If you leave out the keys of an object literal, it will create keys that are the same names as the variable names.
Oh, cool. That's so obvious.
So this creates an object literal with a key string pointing to the value string and a key amount pointing to the value amount. So it should give the exact same output that we had before.
If you, I'm trying stuff. Sorry, I may as well just do it instead of asking.
As soon as this typing.
So if you if we want to go back to the original, we can just click load and it'll overwrite our local pages.
Yes.
So, okay.
Oh, wow.
That's neat.
That is cool.
So this is a feature I wasn't sure about at first, but it turns out I use it all the time. Very common pattern in React is that you're setting state with some new objects, and usually the variable name is the same as the thing that's in the state, so you just do
You're like
structuring.
there.
Backbone model, update attributes.
Backbone
kind of
would be
thing.
very similar, yeah. As a point of preference, I will usually wrap structuring or destructuring in with spaces in between the braces and the values to symbolize to me that that's not a key with a colon at the end of it, that it's a value with a comment after it. And that's just a personal thing.
But you have to name your variables.
Yeah, it'll need to be the same, yeah.
So Tilly,
Sure.
I changed in line 6. I changed string to boomerang, and I changed amount to children.
Mm-hmm.
And it still works for me, which I find shocking.
Are you sure?
It doesn't have to be boomerang and children.
So like that?
Yeah.
It's unexpected.
And then so
Oh,
then
it's because of const.
Yeah, because it's still hoisted.
It's outside of that scope.
You might be right.
What?
So we should do like
Oh, those guys.
Oh,
we
those
should
guys
do
are
let's
overriding.
instead.
Let's will probably
Or just
still
put
work
some-
'cause the
push some
closure is
braces.
on the outside.
Oh yeah, put some bars maybe.
If you put some parens around it, it'll not work.
Mm.
Oh no, it still will. Jesus.
Wait, well, this.
What does this do?
So that's
Oh,
not
sorry,
bad.
thanks. I don't know what I'm
That's
typing.
using magic mind reading.
Yeah,
I mean, it should be able to do it.
That looks like an amount. Let's call it amount.
gotcha.
string
That's
is
interesting.
correct.
So I'll have to
that makes
look
sense.
this up. I thought that when you're using const and let's, that there was
Well-
this thing known as a temporal dead zone, which is this new JavaScript concept, which is really confusing.
Meaning where it won't hoist.
But where, like between
Yeah,
where you
before
declare
the
it and where
concept
you
was
use
at
it,
the top, I
it's
think, so
actually
it
not
was
safe
actually
to check
possible.
type of as undefined. You actually get a reference error if you try to access it.
Is
to
this
the
is this
top.
because your
But
script
that-
is some top level script and
You
not
need
wrapped
to
in a
type
function?
change string to boomerang here.
It might be.
Even though you can change
I
boomerang
mean,
to
are there,
string.
is this a side effect of the transpiler, or is that expected?
Change string to boomerang
I'm not
because
sure off the top of my head.
just to
Okay.
test
But
other
there are
question.
probably
Your
things like
thing
that.
is
It
you need
might
to change
be
the
because
internal
repeat
variable
string
name.
was being executed later in time, and so by the time that it executed, those variables were declared.
That's true.
So that could be
Because in the outside scope, right, like remember the closure chains?
Mhm.
Like in the outside scope, you've got these two variables. On the inside scope, you don't have them. So
Mhm.
it checks previous closure. It checks
Jumps up, yeah.
right, exactly. All right, cool. So let's move on since there's a lot going on. I'm trying to remember what's in more destructuring. This is just array destructuring, which we already talked about. Really, really quickly, we'll talk about rest. I always gotta get enough rest.
Like
Make like
continuation
string.
list?
All right, so we have a function called makeLikeString that we are passing 5 names into, and it's not an array of 5 names; it's 5 separate names. So if we wanted to generate that string, your friends, first person, second person, and however many other friends like this, what would we do?
Use
Look at
arguments.
Yeah, arguments.
All right.
Make an argument.
Does anyone know off the top of your head?
Yeah.
Arguments.
Name
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
Name
Slice.
Yeah. Array
Period.
prototype
Right.
slice dot
Do
apply
this.
this. Or
Dot-
no,
dot
empty
join.
array or arguments.
Right.
Unshift.
Shit,
Uh,
something like
Unshift.
that. Stack Overflow.
All right.
Just helpers dot
I would
arguments
unshift.
to array.
Right.
There you go.
Or
Art.
or it's first, second, others.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Now we've got
Oh,
args
yeah.
and keyword args. We're set. We can basically just write Python to JavaScript.
Yeah,
compiles.
exactly.
So you can see this.
Yeah.
It's Python.
Oh, yeah, that's alright.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Oh my God.
Where do they get this stuff?
Right? Crazy.
You have to use the dot dot dot.
Yeah, so it's the dot 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 before the others in the argument list. We'll take whatever else and we'll just plug it
Is-
into that as an array.
Is others an arrarbitrary variable name? Like if I change
Yeah,
it to
that's
I just
fine.
changed it
long.
to people and it worked.
You can also do something like this.
Whoa.
Ridiculous.
Mm.
Ridiculous.
What if you only
What
pass in
about
one
second
argument?
to last?
Oh, did I lie?
I think you lied.
I might have lied.
Liar.
Till I.
Ah.
Alright. I'll see myself out.
All right. Apparently, you can only do that at the end of the arguments list. Sorry, I'm a liar.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's tricky.
Gotcha.
You
And
could
so
do, but what if you only pass one argument?
ship is undefined.
This is a good chance to.
I think others will be an empty array. You can try it. Check it.
Yeah, that should
Yeah.
be.
Rest param is only valid as the last param of a function.
Else Bob and 3 others.
Oh, the rest.
The rest parameter.
Right.
The others. Yeah.
The rest of them.
Not like
For example.
No.
All right, let's move on to spread really quickly,
Yeah.
so we can make sure we get through this stuff.
State train. Yeah, I appreciate that.
So the very next demo should be spread, and it is the corollary to the rest. So we have this same makeLikeString, and now we have an array of friends: Alice, Bob, Joe, Sue, and John. What would we do to correctly pass that array? As say we did have, as we did last time. How would we take this array and pass it in here?
Asterisk.
Star, yeah.
Stack Overflow apply call arguments.
Right.
Array.
Is it
Copy and
apply or
paste.
is
Get
it
push
call?
force.
I don't know.
Gotcha. Is exactly right. So you would do makeLikeString dot call null comma and then the array of arguments, and that will call it through for you. Or in ES6, you can do that.
Oh.
Getting
not
too excited here.
6 1, half dozen other.
Unexpected token.
Apply
What?
undefined friends.
It's a lot less code though.
And if you look at the transpile ES5 like Kevin is doing, you can see that it actually calls makeLikeString dot apply undefined and then the array, which is exactly how you would do it in real JavaScript.
This is not working.
It's undefined.
Yeah, undefined is an interesting thing.
Undefined, some people pass null. It's just I think undefined is technically that's what this is if you were just to call a function. And so when you call apply, the first argument is what do you want this to be inside that
I
function, so they maintain undefined.
Whoa.
Interesting.
Right.
So like if it, what if it has a different?
Yeah,
If
what if
they
you don't
want
want
this.
it to be undefined?
You can call apply manually, I guess.
But if that was a method on an object and you just had a reference to it and you called it, then this would not be preserved. So that's actually the correct behavior.
Oh.
Wait.
I mean, so like, and I know that there are times it happens, but like there are times you call functions and there is this that's not undefined. What about those cases?
If you call it on an object, so say you had a,
Yeah, let's do this.
say you had this,
So
like
just
that.
Oh,
So
you
in here there was a
I guess
this,
this
and
is
then in
just
here
one.
you would call obj dot. If you look at the transpiled, I would expect it to transpile into
I see.
passing obj.
Ooh,
Is that first
really
part?
cool.
That's what I was after.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So the principle here is that if it is an actual function call on an object, then this gets passed in that
It'll still
object.
get polycraft, yeah.
Otherwise, it's not.
That's kind of nice.
What if you do a dot bind?
Good question. Try it.
I should try. I'm trying the other one because I have another thing I'm trying to figure out. So, but okay, fine. Go ahead. Just move on.
Something around here.
All right, let's take a look at default argument expressions,
From the name.
which
We're
from
just
the
going
name,
further into Python. I
Yeah.
swear these JavaScript developers are just ripping off.
right? So as you can already tell, so we're calling add milliseconds, passing in 43 milliseconds to this date, and you can see it works fine. But if we delete the date, it doesn't work because get time on undefined isn't a thing. So in regular JavaScript, what would you do?
If not, start.
Right, like
Start equals-
start equals whatever.
Or start equals start or.
Right, exactly. There's a few
Triple
different
equal
patterns.
undefined.
The downside to that one is you can't pass 0
Right.
because 0 is falsy,
Yeah,
or
or
an
false,
empty
or
string,
null.
or
Yeah,
null, which
yeah.
are all technically values, even though they're falsy values.
Yeah.
Or in ES6, you can just have a default argument.
Whoa.
And when is that evaluated?
When is it
At
evaluated,
function
Nick?
call time.
How could you tell?
Okay, console
Look
log
at
start.
the-
Is now just a method?
Yeah, we defined it.
Oh, yeah, got it.
It's okay, I had the same thought.
Yeah, that's like
So that was a great question. That's the point of this demo, is that even though we're saying now function call is the default argument, you can see each of these times is different in the console log. So now is being evaluated each time you call at milliseconds and not at the time that it's first defined.
That's different from Python.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of bit me in the past.
Yeah. The common thing is to put none, and if equals none, then
Yeah.
do your
Gotcha.
dynamic assignment.
Or use some lazy thing, but I'm not sure if that actually.
And if you look at the
Actually
if you look at the transpiled JavaScript, you can see that it actually checks to see if arguments 1 is undefined.
I did a whole bunch of testing.
Mhm.
In my last
That's
message.
good to know.
Awesome.
Cool.
Do you see any gotchas with this? Like you mentioned a few where, mainly in the transpiled version, where if it's something falsy, then you run into issues.
Pretty sure this will only assign a default value if you pass null, it won't work. Or if you pass 0, it won't work. But if you pass undefined, if you can spell undefined, it'll work. So it's only if the value is literally not defined.
I see. But you can always just redefine undefined.
Don't do
You
No,
can submit
man.
a pull request to the transpiler to change it to void 0 instead.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Fork the transpiler.
All right, so default arguments is pretty straightforward. Let's go to the next one called arrow functions, which
What?
might be my favorite one. All right, so we have this thing called a greeting generator, which is a prototypal function, and it has a method called generate. And we create one passing in a world as this .name, and then when we call generator.generate, we get cannot read property name of undefined. Why can't we read property name of undefined?
Because the function inside of map, this is window.
That is correct.
Callback.
That's exactly right.
So you just use a bind.
So you just use a bind, right? Like normally we would say .bind this, and now we get howdy world, hello world, greetings world, hi world. ES6 adds a new operator called the arrow function, and the way it works is instead of the word function, you have the parameter list in parentheses, an arrow with the equals mark,
So obvious.
and then
Yeah,
it's
I
very
don't like it.
and then the braces, which is the one thing I feel like CoverScript, yeah. Now the interesting thing about the arrow function is not just that it defines functions in a more concise way, but also that this is scoped lexically. So without binding this,
Yes.
you get the correct this inside, and this is what makes this the killer feature. This.
We did that intentionally. Come on.
I really didn't.
This.
I haven't typed up buying this in forever, and I'm so happy about it. It's really great.
Yeah, it's not bad.
I have sort of a meta question.
Mhm.
So are we gonna?
Migrate all roll.
Yeah.
That's a
It's
much
a
bigger question than I
separate
can answer
question.
right now.
Yeah.
Let's move on to more.
It'll be a party.
It
You
seems
can host
like a
it.
non-trivial amount of partying.
So
the nice thing is it's backwards compatible, so you can do it incrementally. You can do like piece at a time.
Yeah. And we can talk a
Trade-off
little
there
bit
is
about how
inconsistency.
we've already been working with this in schools. Like all the new code that I've been writing in schools for the past several months is written in ES6.
I just sort of assume that all the new code that you write in schools is going to be different than right.
Shouldn't we be able to write a forward transpiler and convert our existing ES5
Yeah.
to ES6?
Yeah, there you go.
Go home for the day.
Yeah, just
Let it run.
just
let
turn
it-
it on.
Like
All
we
of us
did.
leave.
But probably the halting problem is.
Well, what's the point? You
reduces
don't have to
stats.
rewrite it, it
Probably
still
can't do
works.
it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure. We
Right.
this is a bigger
That's just
conversation,
the
but I'm not
punch.
sure it's necessary.
How could we test it? Sorry, guys.
So more arrow functions. The one thing I wanted to point out here, so we have this function called square, which squares whatever you pass in. It works just as expected. One of the shortcuts with arrow functions is if you're just returning one simple expression, you can put that expression on the same line,
Whoa.
get rid of the braces,
So one-liner.
get rid of the braces and the word return. And that,
I love it. I
No
love
word
that.
return.
That's going to be so awkward.
Too
for
much
people.
magic.
So pure.
How about no semicolon? Yeah?
Yeah,
Essential.
I'm less excited
Oh my
too
God.
about that.
But this is a rare case.
You know, I just-
it's so hard to read.
this
what's on the
is
screen
a
right
rare
now.
occasion.
Yeah.
I've used this sometime
This
for
is
like
the sort of shit that I would take and put back into like CoffeeScript to JavaScript converter, so I knew what I wrote.
Right.
Sort of thing.
I've done this before, is having a default
Yeah.
a callback with a default function that evaluates the null. It's just an
Wait,
function.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Callback parameter.
Yeah. So this is a function that just returns null. It'd be similar. It's
So
Can you
if
show
it's
the
like,
compiled
yeah,
output?
like-
yeah. Let's show the file code.
Yeah.
Except that I can't because I. What did I mess up here?
Another arrow before the
What if you need the
right
argument?
brace. You got a function argument inside of a function declaration.
Yeah.
So before the
Oh.
rightmost brace, more arrows.
Thanks.
This is awful.
This is That's a little wild.
Yeah.
I think it's not bad. It's just got to be used in the right place.
I use this-
My brain is yet to parse this. Because
It's-
like,
it's
when
very-
I get there, maybe
it's
I'll
very
try to
different.
figure it out.
It's very different.
I've used this a lot less. Sometimes I'll use this callback style with the default function, and the other thing is if
Like putting things on separate lines, you know. For
Okay, I guess I see what it's doing now.
the one
sure what I
the
think
one
of it.
thing is if you want to return a JavaScript object from inside here, the object literal, or remember the braces indicates that there's going to be a set of statements, not just a single statement. So you have to do that. And this is something I also don't do super often.
I suspect maybe some of this terse syntax would be used for. I don't know. I mean, in the case of line 6, you're defining, you're declaring a function, but you might just go with the traditional function syntax in that case, because it's not like it's not like an ephemeral function that you're passing as a callback.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like,
You might also extract it to a named const declaration above it to give it a name. So like callback equals default callback.
Yeah,
or something.
or something like that. Of course, will also work. Underscore provides a no-op function that's named. So a lot of this is just to demonstrate the capabilities here. That really you shouldn't use this stuff unless it increases the readability of whatever you're working on.
Or job security.
Or just
You're the only one.
The other benefit that you could get out of it is decreasing the size of once it becomes native to these browsers, decreasing the size of your compile JavaScript file. If you can cut out all the word functions.
I think a good minifier would just do the best thing
That's
for
what I'm
you.
saying, like minification
I see what you're saying.
via ES6 shorthands.
Yeah, maybe.
And less readability in your code for your developers.
You're saying as a minification step
a
only.
minification.
Oh, as a notification.
Not with the transpile program. Transpile will add more, I think, in general.
no,
Well, that's what he's saying when it's natively
When
supported.
it's natively
Yeah.
supported.
I see what you're
Use
saying.
it for tricks.
All right, let's jump down a few to classes.
ES6 supports Go to.
What?
Where's
Where'd it come from?
That would be great.
Connor's go-to.
All right. So here at the top, we see that we've defined about as close as you can come to a class in JavaScript, which is a prototype function called greeter that sets the greeting, and then when you greet someone, you just output the greeting. And you can see if we run this, we see hello. So now we want to create a subclass, or whatever you want to call it in JavaScript, that greets an individual person. So what exactly would we do here to set up the proper prototypal inheritance to greeter?
Isn't it like a
Surrogate.
super?
I think greeter.apply.
Surrogate method, ideally. Yeah.
Crystal there.
What does that do? What are you doing?
So this is essentially super in JavaScript. So you want to call the prototype function of your super class, passing in yourself as this.
That's how you do inheritance?
That's basically how you do inheritance.
We would also need to pass a greeting, right?
Yeah, you would also need to pass a greeting, which I failed to put in here. That's exactly right. And then you also need to do something else, and that is
Constructor prototype.
Object that creates.
yeah. So you want to take the prototype from greeter and apply it to the prototype from person greeter, but you don't necessarily want to overwrite the prototype from person greeter. So you want to merge in the keys from the prototype from greeter into person greeter.
So you
And at this point, you decide that you never want to do JavaScript prototypal inheritance again.
Without a
And-
library.
and you
Yeah.
What about the
well,
mixins?
Yeah, you use underscores. It's pretty easy.
Right. So instead, let's create a class greeter.
Oh, boom, baby.
And
But now we can't use the word class anymore.
Yeah.
no.
We'll have to change to a case.
Classes
Yeah,
get a
they got
special
high
method.
It's been a reserved word for a while.
So classes get a special method
For
called
this moment.
constructor. And this is how you use the
Trying to
constructor.
write a language, I'm going to write my class.
If you'll remember from the React workshop we did, if you were here, that this is a way of defining functions without saying function in ES6. And that works here as well. As a matter of fact, in classes, it's actually disallowed to do that. So this is enforced. I don't know.
Wow.
TC39.
It would just it wouldn't make sense because you're not. It's not just an object.
Yeah, it's not an object.
And then similarly, you define class methods the same way.
It's kind of jobbery.
Yeah, it's a little bit jobbery. And so then if we run this, we should still see hello.
And so then how do you do the inheritance?
All right, how do we do the inheritance, Brian?
Colon.
Parenthesis.
That's design.
Inherit.
Inherit.
Extends, yeah. Implements.
Oh, so it's just like it's like we have underscore now.
Oh, wow. You actually do use extends.
You do use
Shit,
extends.
I was only
And
gonna say-
then, oh, look at that
Super?
error I got down
Ah, we
there.
have a
Derived
little super?
constructors must call super.
They must call super.
Huh.
Oh, what? What if I don't want to?
You
Guess I
have
should be
to,
inheriting
otherwise
that.
you're not inheriting.
Otherwise, you're calling it
Yep.
okay.
It is
It's like you're an adopted, but
it
they
is a
didn't
valid
tell you until
use
too
case,
late.
though.
So is there? I mean, this is inheritance, which is like mostly something people don't want to do anymore. Do they have any mix-in type thing?
No mix-ins in the current spec, no. I think maybe there's some proposals for ES7.
Alright.
Can we do multiple inheritance? I'm asking because you can use it as mix-ins.
I wasn't sure if you were
I hate you
going
too.
no, oh god, I hope that does.
Shut your C++ mouth.
Right? I guess you want the what's that stupid SCLib or
What?
the crazy thing that had like vectors and stuff. So any C++ programmers
Oh, that's standard,
the
yeah.
standard lib or whatever.
Oh, Boost, STL.
Yeah.
Yeah, the STL, that's the one.
STL.
Standard template library.
Template
that
library.
thing.
Shoot me now.
All right.
Real meta programming.
So that's enough of that. There's one more thing I want to cover, and that's maps. Take a look at maps. So here we have 3 users with a first name and a last name, and we want to associate each user with a score. How would we do this? So we say we want to say that Bob has 10 points and Fred has 20 points, and the other Bob has 30 points.
So it's a map from user to a number of
It's a
points?
map from a user to a number of points.
You'd assign each user a GUID
Right. Why is that?
because you can't have your keys be objects.
That's exactly right. So
Keys
objects
must be strings.
Keys must be strings in JavaScript
So
objects, and because these people share some first and last names that conflict with each other, there's no way to really generate a unique key for each of them. So you'd have to give them an ID or a GUID or something like that.
Make a list of 2 tuples. You can
Right,
make a list of
yeah,
like
something like
user,
that, yeah.
comma, score, which
Right.
you don't get dictionary lookup.
Yeah.
What you do get these days is what's called a map. So we'll say const user scores equals new map, and then a map will allow you to map any value to any other value. So you can say user scores dot set user 1 10 points, user 2 and 3 have 20 and 30 points. So now if you want to get user 2's score, you can say user scores dot get user 2. You can see they have 20 points.
Can you console.log user scores?
Yeah.
Can you
And
collapse?
Transpile?
It's interesting. Why are we
It's the whole
seeing
object.
that? Oh, it's just 'cause
So
It's a new object type.
if you look at the transpiled ES5, you'll see that it looks exactly like the untranspiled ES6, and that's
browser
because
polyfill.
that there is a polyfill.
Yeah,
But
right.
I guess you're in the source looking around. So there is a polyfill for some of the features that can't be transpiled, but can be
Polyfill.
polyfilled. So like reflections, you just can't polyfill. There's no way to do it. Proxies are super advanced. You can't do that. But you can create some sort of map data structure, and under the hood, it must be doing some sort of GUID creation in an object with strings.
It's like a standard library data type.
Yep. There's also a thing called a weak map, which is very useful in JavaScript. A weak map is just like a map, except if your key goes out of scope, it automatically gets unassigned from the map, so you can't accidentally leak references by storing them in data structures.
So generally, we should use a weak map. It sounds
Generally, I think you want to use a weak map, but you can't iterate over the keys or values of a weak map. You have to
Is that a
trust the
native language
JavaScript.
construct?
In ES6 it is.
Right, you can't polyfill that.
Good question. There's definitely a weak map implementation. I don't know how that works. I'm super curious. I don't want to look into that now.
Yeah, you have to just manually say, I am using this variable. Now I'm no longer using this.
Cool. And so those are the major features I wanted to touch on. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here. Promises. I know we've all kind of used promises in the code bases before. ES6 has a standard implementation of promises. The advantage to using that standard implementation is that a lot of the asynchronous browser features like AJAX or the return value from set timeout will start to turn into promises. And so you'll see promises more and more in native APIs as time goes on. They also interact with await async, which is an ES7 proposal, and probably one of my favorite new language features of all time. But that is for another day.
Not today?
Not
Today?
today.
We have 7 more minutes.
Yeah, come on.
All right, take a look at it.
Or we should take time for
Let's take time
questions.
for questions. That's a good one. Yeah.
Well, my question is just like what the class thing. So
Yeah.
like, I definitely want to be able to do mixins, right? Is there a way to do mixins with classes, even if it's JavaScripty?
You would have to have some third party like mixin library or some way to mix in the prototypes. The class and extends thing is just official patterns around the common case of doing prototypal inheritance.
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
Don't support mixins.
But I mean,
with the
it's,
syntax.
I don't. Am I digging into the transpiled code in order to do that, or am I like? Is it like something that's still going to work in ES6 if I like?
It'll still you still have access to like you'll still have access to that thing turns into a constructor function and it has a prototype that you have access to.
Okay.
So you could say like reader.prototype and mix in methods to
I
that.
guess your question is whether the backbone and the underscore
If I can
extend
do underscore
will do the right thing in this case.
I assume that if you the dot extend might not, but if you do like underscore extend whatever dot prototype and then some methods, that would allow you to mix in methods.
Yeah.
Which is what we do in seminar, right?
Yeah.
Use underscore dot extend prototype comma dictionary of.
Which is
Mix
what
in
I think
methods.
Backbone Extend is doing under the hood anyway.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
creating a
that's
thing
what I
for you and then extending the prototype for you.
Yeah.
So it's totally compatible with ES6
Yeah,
classes.
it's be compatible with this stuff.
Yeah, we should test that before doing it.
Yeah, sure.
No, we
No,
we shouldn't do
never
things
test
without
that.
tests.
No,
Nick only.
Sorry.
Crazy,
Sorry.
crazy, Nick.
Sorry, I'm
Jesus.
so weird.
What's up, dude?
Such a square.
Can you load up your classes and show the transpiled ES? Just because I didn't copy, I got lazy halfway through this demonstration.
I wonder if I can just undo a bunch. Oh, that was it.
You didn't save.
Kind of amazing shit.
Yeah. Or by the transpiler.
Like define some like what is this to define?
You have any idea like how long the transpiler would take to work?
And then everything else.
With a lot of code.
Not an exact number. I use Webpack Dev
Yeah,
Server,
I've heard that term.
which will
That's-
run the transpiler when you
pattern.
request the file, and
It's
so if it's not
a
ready
traditional
yet, it'll just block the request, so you don't get the thing when you refresh, but you get old code by accident. Once you have the initial module built, and you're like changing file by file, that's much faster than the bundle. But in a large JavaScript project, like compile this for production, something like Seminar, you'd probably be looking at half a minute or more.
So what browsers currently support ES6?
There's a bunch of different browsers that support a bunch of different pieces of ES6, and Jen has a great graph that he'll send around.
I sent out in chat.
Great.
Can you scroll up in that one? I want to see what inheritance equals. Okay.
Yep.
Ugh.
This actually, I think, will do
But that's a
object.create.
Yeah.
That'll be a one-time thing to
Right.
define the solvers, right? And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
That's an underscore anyways. Like
oh, it is.
I mean something like it is.
Yeah, it's very similar. So you can see it's doing the same thing. Is it takes the subclasses prototype and extends the superclasses prototype with the new constructor, and then sets its proto to superclass.
And do you have to do anything to enable the transpiler in Chrome, or is it like built in?
So
right now?
that's not a built-in thing. So this is using a project called Babel. That used to be called 6 to 5, but they support more than just ES6. So in the schools pipeline, this is automatically a part of the asset stuff that you run, and if you request a bundle that uses ES6 transpiler, it will behind the scenes transpile it for you and then give it to you. And then in production, we just compile that to a static minified file.
So in production, when the way you guys had it set up, it doesn't. If you did see an error, you would see it in the transpile code. Like you wouldn't have any mappings.
I think we do generate the source maps during our
Yeah.
transpile. If you didn't, you would just see the minified code.
Right.
And if it wasn't minified, then yeah, you would just see it in the transpile code.
Gotcha.
So you can use source maps independently of ES6 transpilation. You can use it
Correct.
for minifiers as well.
Minification, any number of
And there
forms.
are there CSS source maps as well for SCSS? That's been around for a while.
There are. That's been around for a while, and I thought we got them to work when we were at Learner's one time, but I don't remember exactly how that worked. So I know a lot less about that.
Didn't David have that working for something at some point here?
Maybe.
I'm not. Yeah, I mean, he had something, but I don't think he actually got to the point where it was checked in for everybody.
So if you're interested in seeing some of this in the wild, in the school's code base, things like the prepare page, Jason and I have worked on, and some other things like the FC Mentors app, is written in the style. It looks fairly similar to the JavaScript you know and love, with the addition of more arrow functions and some classes and the word const a lot. I found it was pretty easy to pick up on. I would assume with the folks in this room that if you're interested in learning and picking up on the stuff, that it wouldn't take a lot of practice. A lot of it I found is the way I feel like the language just should have always worked, and so it very quickly snapped into place that like, okay, this is what this does.
It was really easy to get up to speed on, from my perspective. I had not read very much about this until I just jumped into the code base and was like, oh,
Yeah.
that
So
kind of makes sense.
Is it the case like if you were to turn on transpiling and just ran into a basic seminar, that everything would just work without any problems, or would there actually be problems?
Since since none of the the transpiler works by analyzing the AST and looking for the new features and turning them into old features.
Right.
And since there are no new features, I would expect that just none of the passes would run. it might make small changes like adding use strict to the top of your file and that kind of stuff, but I would expect for the most part it would just work.
It might be useful to run it in something like verbose mode to see what actual changes it makes, because if it's doing stuff beyond just putting a use strict, that would be concerned.
It could be interesting. So one of the questions, like if we did want to experiment with this in seminar, how would we do it? And the answer is required.js is horrible and I hate it and it makes me very sad and we can't.
That's not relevant to this conversation.
It is relevant. It's really difficult to hook required.js up to transpiling tools, at least in dev time. So like very difficult to do something like Webpack dev server. For the compilation, you could run it through that.
What about like the handlebars?
Yeah,
It's like the bang
HBS.
You could, if you wanted to prefix everything with like
ES6.
load the entire transpiler in the browser and then transpile my source code and then run it every time I request it, you could do that, but it would be very slow because there's no caching going on of is this already transpiled or not.
What about something like file watching and like compiling into another directory structure?
That's the way that tools like Webpack and Webpack Dev Server work, and so something like that would work.
So you could do that today in seminar.
So you could potentially do that, yeah,
And these are nice
yeah, that's
things
a good
to-
point.
That might be the best way.
Yeah, it's like
Try it.
I feel like the
And you
majority
lose
of
the whole
it
required.js like
actually covered
2 feet in 2 worlds
using
thing.
underscore.
How do you mean?
Because required.js, the idea is like it works in the browser and on the server. Like
Right, so in the browser you
everything's
just
supposed
did
to-
that,
every
yeah.
plugin you write, you're actually writing 2 plugins. You're writing
Right.
a node plugin and a browser plugin
Exactly.
at the same time.
We ran into the same thing with the JSX stuff. It's like there's a version of the plugin I wrote to work in Node, and then a version of the plugin I wrote that does the source transform in the browser.
Oh, I see. Right.
So it's almost like required.js is really just like 2 parallel implementations of everything.
Essentially,
More or less, right?
More or less,
And so if you're gonna do all the build on the server anyway, you just dump half of it,
right?
more or less.
So
it's
what-
kind of pointless.
Right. So what we're doing for schools, we're using a tool called Webpack, which we use to compile it all for production. And that same tool also has a mode where you can more quickly serve files up in development mode, and that runs as a background task. And the Django asset pipeline is set to determine if that's running, and if it is, to use that tool to get the JavaScript.
Awesome. Thanks for the overview too.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah,
great.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll send out, like I said, some more stuff after this. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Cool.
Quargs everywhere.
Yeah.
I think I'm most excited about some of the most basic features here.
I agree.
Like just the little syntax
Yeah.
niceties.
90% of what I do is like the new block scoping, passing in arrow functions to map, so I don't have to worry about binding this, and also there's a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
And that's most of it. I use the class syntax now for creating rack components. Class thing extends rack.component, and that's really about it. Like a lot of these other features. I guess I use promises before those, so maybe I don't think about that too much.
I love the quads,
That's nice.
Spark is pretty nice.
readability, like
Yeah.
I do use that quite a bit. Yeah.
I miss CoffeeScript, so this makes me happy.
Yeah.
This is like CoffeeScript.
This
I hate
this
CoffeeScript.
So
This-
no.
The CoffeeScript parts of this make me sad.
There was a lot about CoffeeScript I liked, and then it went a lot farther than I liked. It was white space. What's the word? White space.
Aware,
Not
sensitive.
Sensitive, maybe is the word. Some other stuff. There was no good way of like passing an anonymous function, like a set timeout with a function, and then a time. You had that floating comma.
You have that repair,
spelled
yeah,
weird, or parentheses.
yeah.
And since the arrow functions use braces, I think that feels more natural in JavaScript. So anyway,
Still more craft.
it's a little bit more craft, but ES6 gets me like 95% of the stuff I liked out of CoffeeScript anyway. So
I like the defaults. The defaults are great.
the default is great.
Oh, you didn't mention the other place you're using ES6, silly. New rec agent is no
Oh, and
ES6,
the
right?
agent, yeah. The new rec agent on the client is ES6, just like it is in schools, but also there's a inline transpiler for Node.
So the server side code.
Is it the same transpower? That's
All the same source code.
Thanks, Tilly.
Yeah, thank you.